But hello, my name is Helen Atkins. I am an artist. Have born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and this is where I have been privileged to live and work. As Julia said, I sort of got my start in the creative community here through the Harvard Art Center when I was 18 in 2012, through the apprenticeship they have that created public mosaic artworks on the Convention Center and the Hauntable Library, amongst other places. And I just can't say how much I owe to this place and this body of staff who have really inspired me and mentored me throughout my art career. And I don't think I would be an artist if I didn't land here. So I'm so thankful to be showing this body of work here and to have a solo show here. And I'm really thankful to all of you who've joined. I know that we are all just inundated with Zoom, and I know that it's a lot to like add another thing on your after hours plate, like another Zoom meeting. So I really appreciate it a lot. And as I said before, I'm a visual artist. I work in different mediums and in different subject matter, but the common thread of my work is its human focus. And I often focus on the intersection of art and social action and social justice. And so the body of work that I'm going to be sharing with you today is similar in that vein and is sculptural and mostly ceramic based. And I'm going to share with you a slideshow that I've prepared that moves through sort of its inception and its inspiration and the themes and subject matter that it tackles. So I will start doing that now. So in 2018, myself, Jordan Bernicke, who is here, and Monique Rivera, a fellow ceramicist, launched a program called Plates Against Patriarchy, which invited women across the nation to share their selfies and their stories with us. And in 2019, we were able to share this work at the Harvard Art Center. And from that experience, I knew that I really enjoyed that model of asking the muse to share their image. And so I feel that it empowers the muse. And as a figurative artist, I'm very aware that figurative work has so much power in its connotation and its impact and meaning. And I really like when the figure, the person, is taking ownership or a partner in that expression. So I knew in my next gallery exhibition, I wanted to include that model where I asked people to share with me something, and then I transformed it into something else. And so I landed on the stomach as an area that I wanted to focus on. So this is sort of like a self-portrait, and it was the first sculpture that I made with this exhibition in mind. And I took photos of my own stomach and I sculpted it. And this image is called I Always Wished My Stomach Was Small. And that sort of speaks to the inspiration of the exhibition as in its entirety, that I think that myself and a lot of us out there have this societal pressure and this desire and this wish to change our bodies in a specific way. And I was interested in what that cultural pressure does to our identity. So I sculpted this piece and I shared it on social media, and I asked people to share their belly pictures with me very informally. And I was kind of surprised at how many people like actually shared pictures of their stomachs with me. So I began sculpting sort of votives like this for my gallery proposal. And so this sort of shows the early stages of this work, that it was this dialogue between myself and those who shared the images with me. But as I was doing this, and after I got accepted and I was asking for pictures and sort of working on this body of work, there was something that wasn't clicking for me. I wasn't as moved by the work that I was creating as I was with Plates Against Patriarchy. And I think that was coming from this space of missing that cultural connotation that the plates had. The plates, the porcelain plates as a surface, had this visual meaning right off the bat that I think the viewer could really digest and understand with little commentary. And so these sculptures, while I think they have some merit, it was just lacking something. They weren't in dialogue with one another, and they weren't providing the strength in imagery that I wanted them to. And then I started to think of some work that I do that's not sculptural. So these are paintings that I do from a series that I call Divine Reflections. And I paint them on found object mirrors, and they're usually bathroom scenes. And in them, I loosely mimic and I'm inspired by Byzantine iconography and that religious practice. And I'm sort of drawing a parallel between secular ritual and religious ritual and the promise of transformation that they both have. And so when I started to contemplate this body of work, it sort of clicked in my mind that my interaction with the viewer was doing, in essence, that these paintings were doing. And so I wanted to use the mirror as the canvas, as we did in Plates Against Patriarchy with the plates. And so I began finding vintage mirrors and sculpting in their frames the bellies. So this is an example of that process. So this is a piece in process, and what it is the mirror is an actual found object, and I'm using modeling clay to sculpt the belly in that mirror. And then this object I will take and make a plaster mold of, and then pour it in either porcelain slip or stoneware slip, resulting in the finished product. And this was really like the influence of kind of the pandemic. So like, because of the pandemic, I sort of didn't have access to my studio and my regular tools, and I was working in my boyfriend Will, his studio, and he is a ceramicist who often works in slip casting. So it kind of like dawned on me that I could use this medium in that way. And so his work was a big influence on that. And these pieces, they evoke that meaning to me that the plates did, where they're using a common image or an image that we all have reference with and putting the figure onto them. And I think that marriage says a lot. It speaks to what I'm trying to evoke. And so I continued to collect images of people's bellies. I collected more than I could make pieces in this time period. This process is a little bit more time consuming than just like sculpting the pieces as I was initially planning to. So I decided to focus on 6 submissions for this exhibition, and I view this work as ongoing. So here's an example of an image that somebody sent to me. And then here's an example of how I would transform that image. And so that transformation became something that I was really focused on. I thought about the mirror as this conduit where we wish or we pray for transformation, and we have this dialogue with ourselves, hoping that we will transform. And then I saw this practice of gathering images via social media as a new kind of transformation that isn't dependent on the subject actually changing. So myself and the muse are engaging in a new type of transformation that accepts their body as it is. And I found that to be very powerful. And so when I was working on these portraits, belly portraits as I came to call them once they were sitting in the vintage frames, I wanted to, it dawned on me that through my act of creating a mold over the pieces and duplicating them, that I was sort of mirroring our relationship with the mirror. So our engagement with our reflection, it's not a true version of ourself. It's like a duplicate of it. So I was really interested in me duplicating the pieces. And then I decided to duplicate each sculpture that I made in clay in resin. So once the clay sculptures were finished, I then made a mold of them and cast them in resin. And I view this as the sort of dissidence between ourselves and our reflection. So when we're looking at ourselves, we're looking at this distorted image. It's not a true image of who we are. And the resin duplicates are like this distorted image of the clay sculptures. And so when I was doing this work, I started to think of the exhibition as a whole and how each piece was going to correlate with one another and with the installation. And so coincidingly, my boyfriend and I were working on a set of vessels that mimic the organs. And this project was at first very separate from my own exhibition. So we wanted to make a set of vessels that mimic the internal organs. And we thought, and this was kind of, it came into ideation before the pandemic, and we thought it would be really cool to have events and gallery exhibitions where people would eat out of these organs, and we would gather and, you know, have like basically these parties where we're all sharing food out of this one body. And we still wanted to continue that work despite, you know, the new landscape that we all see ourselves in. And then while I was building the belly portraits, it dawned on me that these two projects were very much related. And so here's an example of a singular piece in that set. It's a stomach. And together, it makes the internal organs of the torso. And that's when it sort of dawned on me that I could pull this other connotation out of the belly portraits and further push that similarity I see between religious ritual and secular ritual. And the body, I kept thinking of the phrase take, eat, and it just became this stand-in for like a Eucharist or a communion ritual. And so then we decided that it all fit together. And I decided that it would be really cool if the belly portraits kind of mimicked this Last Supper. So there are 11 of them. And then as you can see in this piece right here, there are 2 seats at the table, and that would mimic the figures at a Last Supper painting. And then the body in front of them is supposed to mimic this idea of Christ. And so what we did was we filmed a video of us eating from the vessels, and I will play that for you now. And so what this sort of video piece evokes for me is that idea of transformation, where I started sort of the inspiration of these pieces from. And it is that I think as humans, we really hope for transformation. We really work towards transformation. And we really sometimes believe that we need to transform in order to be good or acceptable. And I think that religious ritual and secular ideas of wellness and diet culture really push that on us as well. And the ironic thing to me is that transformation is constantly happening and we're in a constant state of transforming. And this piece really evokes that, right? Because we eat this meal and the canvas transforms, the plates move, the body shifts, and we change as we go through this process of eating with one another. But then in the end, it goes back. And it really plays into that idea of the ongoing nature of transformation. And so with this series as a whole, I'm really examining that idea of transformation, critiquing on one hand the cultural pressure to transform, but acknowledging on the other hand that transformation is synonymous with life. And that's what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Helen. Thank you so much for sharing with us today your body of work and all of your beautiful vision and process. It's so illuminating, even having witnessed your work closely firsthand unfold. It's so illuminating to hear you speak about it. I want to invite everybody to share questions with us. Something a little funny appears to be happening with the chat. So if you wouldn't mind, when you go to chat, grabbing me from the list, you can see my name is Harwood Arts Center, and messaging me so that I can do my diligence in moderating. And so please, again, send questions via chat to Harwood Arts Center. And Helen, you have been preparing, while we give people a moment to send me those questions, you have been preparing for this show, well, arguably your whole life as an artist and then your whole life as a woman artist. And then you've formally been preparing for this show for a year. Would you talk about the temporality of it and how you found yourself relating to your original concept versus, and it's still like really very resonant with your original proposal, but would you talk about how the circumstances have shifted you across that timescape?
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny because right when the pandemic hit was when I had planned to really throw myself. So I was doing work beforehand, but I had planned in my timeline to really throw myself into this body of work. So obviously the world changed when I started to work on this. And really early on in that process, I had a conversation with a friend and colleague of mine who supports my work in other ways. And somehow that conversation just veered into weight gain during the pandemic, not because of any of the work that we were talking about, not because of just naturally veered that way. And it was then that I realized that I worried at first that this work was no longer relevant when the pandemic hit. I was like, oh, we're all living in a completely different landscape with completely different stresses than before. And I had this initial worry that this was no longer relevant. But then after that conversation, I realized this is more relevant than ever. And as I had more time to be in myself and in my body, I felt that. And I realized that other people were feeling that space to exist in their bodies, but also that pressure from society already where it's like, oh my God, the quarantine 15, can't let it happen. You're gonna die if it happens. And I think that's what gave me the push to think about things a little bit more and to be more critical of the work that I was doing. And I think if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would have just left it at the sort of busts that I was creating or the sculptural torsos with less connotative meaning behind them. And I'm really happy that I had a second chance to delve into these things a little bit deeper.
Thank you. We do have a question, a reminder that with questions, you can message me at Harwood Art Center through the chat function. On the note of transformation and on the note of your models and subjects, Helen, we have a question about identity of the models, and if you could speak more to who, respectfully and honorably of them, but to who was featured across these pieces.
So I did get a pretty wide range of people sharing photos with me, a diverse range of gender and age, but also of people that I know and people that I didn't actually know. And when I was starting to work on pieces that I knew would land in the show, I wanted to be respectful of that because I quickly knew that I wasn't going to be able to make a piece for every single person, which was actually kind of sad to me because for Plates Against Patriarchy, we made one of every woman. That was like a goal. But what I tried to do instead was to have a diverse offering. So I tried to pick people that I didn't know and have at least one representative of like a different race, a different gender, a different like age range. But really what ended up happening, even though I think I successfully did that, I was pairing like pictures that people would send me with frames that I had. So when a belly seemed to fit a certain frame, that's when I sculpted it. And as I mentioned before, it's an ongoing series. I don't think that I'm just going to neglect those photos that were sent to me. I think that eventually I will get to every single one.
Beautiful, thank you, Helen. There's a question about how compositionally some of the pieces have snakes and butterflies and other background elements as well. Could you share the influence behind these choices and the interpretations that may go with each?
So that comes from the individual attention to each photo. So back to Plates Against Patriarchy, Jordan was painting the backgrounds of each plate. And what she would do was read the stories that women shared, and she would then come up with imagery to pair with the story. And so I sort of took a similar approach. Like, for example, the butterfly piece, the woman who shared her photo with me, she shared two photos, and she shared a before and after piece. And she talked about her weight loss journey. And it was just really interesting the way they came into my inbox. They came in side by side, and it looked like butterfly wings to me. So I decided to use that imagery, and then instead of doing the after piece, I just did two befores, which is a little bit of a political statement on my own. But I thought that it would be apropos. And the snakes, the person who shared that photo with me, she was wearing some snake jewelry that was really like, people when they're taking, this is something I realized in Plates Against Patriarchy, is that people when they're sending you photos online, they're not hypercritical of everything that's happening. So I think a lot of times artists, when you're taking a photo for reference for a piece, you're very aware of like, what's going on in the background? What is the jewelry doing? What's this doing? And other people, they don't have that critique. They're mostly critiquing themselves and how their body is positioned. And I kind of think that's really cool and lovely. And it's a really interesting challenge as an artist. But one of the things was that like a piece of jewelry that she was wearing that had a snake emblem on it was like kind of awkwardly hanging half in the photo. And I was like, I need to fit that in there somehow. And then the other thing is that some of the frames aren't necessarily like, they don't fit the standard of a body, if that makes sense, right? So like this circular form or this ovular form doesn't fit the form of a body. So rather than try and like force that person's body to fit within the frame, I decided to think of like more creative ways around that. And that's where the state comes from.
Thank you. And then we have time for one more. In previous work, Helen, bodies of work, collections and collectives, your palette and color choice has been really central to the whole. Would you talk about your use of color in this exhibition and how important it was to you and to your choices?
So the color I think derived from this. So there's this reckoning when you're doing figurative work, or at least when I'm doing figurative work, where it's like somewhat real, with how real do you go? And I wanted to, I knew that I didn't want to do sculptures that mimicked skin tone for this body of work. But I also didn't want to just like stamp colors on people with no like rhyme or reason, right? Like I didn't want to just have like vibrant colors for no reason. And so the central piece that you can kind of see behind me in the gallery that has a mirror aspect to it, to me, it looks like these sun rays. And so that sort of became where the use of yellow became really strong to me. And then when I was thinking of the body vessels, and I knew that they were gonna have like pinks and reds and that sort of like organ feeling to them, I kind of just decided that pink and yellow was the way to go. And I think that that evokes, like I said, that feeling of like flesh and, you know, the real reality of what the human body is. And then the yellow sort of for me is that heavenly aspect. And again, so it sort of has both that like really humanistic part and then that really religious or spiritual part.
Helen, this has been such a glorious time with you today and such a beautiful learning opportunity around your work. And again, it feels like a really beautiful culminating moment for this exhibition.